Thomas Piketty, Keith Spencer wrote a brilliant piece about this for Salon magazine. Thomas Piketty has a new paper out. Back in 2013, he wrote the book Capital in the 21st Century. And this new paper says this, I'm quoting now from Keith Spencer, who wrote the piece about the paper, that Piketty's paper says that shifting the Democratic party platform more to the left is actually a winning electoral strategy that can help bring back disenfranchised working-class voters and less educated voters who currently may not vote at all or who identify with right-wing populism. He points out that in the 50s and 60s, most of the working class and lower economic classes in the United States voted for the Democratic Party. They viewed the Democratic Party as the party of the working man and the party of the poor person, or the party of the low-income person. And, you know, the upper-income people mostly voted for the Republican Party. And he said that over time, yet over time, this is, again, quoting Keith Spencer's piece in Salon today, yet over time, those parties, Piketty explains, quote, gradually became associated with higher education voters, end quote, which he describes as creating a system of, quote, multiple elite parties, where high education elites now vote for the left and high-income, high-wealth elites still vote for the right. In other words, both sides of the spectrum, in other words, both parties, the Democratic and Republican, became parties of the elite, with no party for less educated folks or for the working class. This is what Thomas Frank points out in his most recent book, Listen Liberal, which, if you haven't read, is so worth the read. And Thomas Frank documents how the Democratic Party, pre-1990 basically, was the party of the bottom 90%. And that the decisions that were made, mostly by Al Fromm and the Democratic Leadership Council, now the Third Way Group, the decision that they made was, instead of being the party of the 90%, the bottom 90%, we need to be the party of the top 10%, the white-collar party, because that's the direction the economy is going. We're not going to have any industrial infrastructure left. Manufacturing is going to go overseas in this new era that Reagan brought us. Manufacturing is going to go away. The unions are dying. And so, you know, we've got to get the white-collar voters, the guy who's making $80,000 a year working as a banker. That's got to be the Democratic Party vote. And the Democratic Party has basically pitched that for the last, 20-some-odd years, and it has not worked out so well, shall we say. And back to the article here from Salon. He writes, if the Democratic Party were wise, it would see Piketty's paper as a chance to improve its electoral strategy. Indeed, the Democrats seem to be locked in a battle for their soul, a fight long presaged that erupted during the 2016 presidential primary. In one corner sits the Clintonite corporate wing of the party, who believe that the key to Democratic Party strategy is to move to the center in order to pick up moderate conservative voters who feel left behind by the Republican Party's far-right shift. This was Clinton's strategy to a T, writes Keith. In her election campaign, she bragged about her connections to Henry Kissinger and her support from billionaire Republicans like former eBay CEO Meg Whitman, while being famously dismissive of social democratic policies like single-payer health care. In the other corner, there are those who argue that the Democratic Party will win more voters if it appeals explicitly to class interests and concerns. As Steve Phillips wrote in a Times op-ed last year, quote, if Democrats had stemmed the defections of white voters to the Libertarian or Green parties, they would have won Michigan and Wisconsin. And had they also inspired African Americans in Pennsylvania, Mrs. Clinton would now be president. If progressive whites are defecting because they are uninspired by Democrats, moving further to the right will only deepen their disillusionment. He goes on, Keith goes on to write, critics like Phillips argue that Clinton and her DNC followers failed to grasp that her milquetoast liberalism lacked a comprehensive ideology. There are no scapegoats, and America was already great, in Clinton's words. Those words appeared tone-deaf to the millions of Americans struggling to make ends meet, who sought a scapegoat and heard a more sensible explanation for their woes from Donald Trump. And then he wraps up by saying, though Sanders came up short in the primaries, he was vindicated in the aftermath of the general election in several ways. First, many of the Rust Belt states that Trump carried, states Hillary Clinton had banked on winning, were won by Bernie Sanders in the primary, including Michigan and Wisconsin. Second, post-election studies suggested that had Sanders been the Democratic nominee, he would have easily defeated Trump by a wide margin. Third, Sanders remains the most popular politician in the United States, despite an ongoing bile-spitting campaign orchestrated by Democratic insiders like Sally Albright, who called Sanders racist for proposing free college, or Peter Dow, who blamed Sanders for Clinton's loss. Finally, Clinton's victory was aided considerably by a corrupt party apparatus that was already in the bag for Clinton, as former interim DNC chair Donna Brazile has described in her most recent book. So, not wanting to reignite the Bernie-Hillary wars, let's move on from that, and I'm not even going to take any calls on any of that. But the reality is, and I think Thomas Piketty is absolutely right, that if the Democratic Party embraces the Progressive Caucus and the values held by the Progressive Caucus, let's take Bernie out of the equation altogether. If the Democratic Party were to embrace Franklin Roosevelt, if the Democratic Party were to embrace the policies of Lyndon Johnson outside of the Vietnam War, they would once again massively win elections.